there's no gas.
There's no gas. That's right. They dump all the fuel out.
So the scene that follows is actually a scene that was planned for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it is the, would you call it a raft?
Yeah, it's large sea raft.
Where the sea raft falls out of the plane with Short Round, Willie, and Indy in it. That whole scene was meant for the previous film.
Well, I think they had all the stuff for it, right?
They might have.
I think they already had all the stuff, and they just said that there was too much for one movie, and then they just kept it for the next time around. Because I know the minecart scene was also for the first film.
It was.
But they didn't have that stuff yet. I think they hadn't built that set. I think that was all for... They just built it for Temple of Doom.
Okay. Well, the raft scene is a great stunt sequence. They end up on the snow, and then they end up in a river.
The pacing is still just spot on from the previous film. That's one of Spielberg's highest strengths. Because you go straight from the dance sequence or the singing sequence to the shootout, right into the plane sequence, where it takes you from the plane sequence into the raft sequence, and then that's probably 20 minutes worth right there.
Yeah,
of just straight action that's nonstop, and it's just set piece after set piece. And then once they get to the little village, that's when you can finally take a deep breath and realize, okay, he's starting to, we're grounded. We can take a minute and figure something out. This is definitely the point of just exposition in the movie. We kind of figure out what pushes everything and what gets everything going, which even in an Indiana Jones movie, like I'd said before, is still... It's not like other movies where an exposition scene just kind of feels like you're just talking. No, this is, they make it work really well.
And it's in the village where we learn just how dark this movie is going to get. There are stolen children. Children are being enslaved. And that's dark.
It's definitely a big change. I mean, previously the previous film obviously was dealing with Nazis, and somehow this is topping the darkness level of it. It's getting intense with what they're talking about. I'm curious, do you think this movie is mean-spirited at all?
Mean-spirited?
I've heard it described as Spielberg's meanest film, and obviously the darkest. But I have heard mean-spirited, which I'm not really sure if that's the right terminology for it, but I think it's still interesting to think that that's how you'd see it, especially with, like I had said, he often has a childlike wonder to his movies, and this kind of lacks a lot of that.
I think it lacks childlike wonder entirely.
Yeah.
I can't say for sure if I think it's mean-spirited, simply because I don't know what mean-spirited means. But I would say that the spirit of the film is nothing like any other Indiana Jones film. I don't think it has a bright spirit at all. I think it's too dark. There is a scene toward the end of the film, well, middle to end of the film, where we off screen see a child get beaten, whipped.
There's also a sequence where, and I know it's very dark, but a child pretty much begging for death.
Yes.
In a cage. I mean, that's something that...
Yeah.
I don't know where you come up with that for... I mean, that's pretty bad.
I believe the child says that they pray to die, but they won't die. So for those who argue that this is a mean-spirited film, again, I want to learn more about what that means or what that phrase entails. I can see the argument, definitely. If I haven't mentioned it in this recording yet, I'm going to say it now. This is my least favorite Indiana Jones film because it lacks the spirit of Indiana Jones, in my opinion. You said it was your favorite right now at the moment, right?
Again, my ideas kind of bounce around on which one's my favorite, but more often than not, I find this one to be my go-to one.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think it being a little bit different also is more intriguing to me. It's not, obviously I love all the movies, but it being so different, I find it just a little bit more, I kind of want to go back to it and see what they're doing again.
This film is so dark, I couldn't even watch it before bed. I put it on a few nights ago and figured, okay, it's 9 o'clock in the evening. I got to be asleep by like 11:30 at night. I'll just watch The Temple of Doom. And about an hour into this film, I said, it's too late for this. I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to sleep. This is too dark. So I ended up finishing it a different day during the daytime. It just has a mean spirit about it.
There you go.
There we go. I figured it out. I cracked the code. I don't like the spirit of the film.
Even the comedy that is put in there is still a different tone to what Raiders was and what Last Crusade would be. A good example is the dinner sequence at the palace, which I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but that's obviously just gag after gag. It's all these fun little props that they have. It's all still really just meant to be gross.
Yeah.
Which, there was some gross stuff in the Raiders movie, but this was just still to this day, I'm just still like, it's my favorite dinner sequence in any movie, by the way. I don't know why. I always loved it, but it's just really gross, and it's not as lighthearted as Raiders would have made it,
So we have, and we will work our way up to this point in the story, but since we're on the topic of the dinner, we have Snake Surprise, which is, I think, a pregnant snake.
I think it's a python?
A pregnant python, and they eat they cut it open, sorry to be gross, and they eat the little baby snakes inside. They have...
Which I still was struggling to understand how that was such a cuisine.
Oh, yeah. Ugh. We have probably the most tolerable dish in that sequence are the beetles. Because, in some parts of the world, bugs are a delicacy, Okay. We have eyeball soup, which we don't know if they're human eyeballs or some other animal's eyeballs.
Sure, it sure looked like Party City eyeballs.
It did. And
the most famous of them all
was the dessert, chilled monkey brain, which makes Willie pass out.
Every bit of it is just as gross as it sounds. It's going for it. It's going all out, and I respect it a lot, but I know a lot of people don't care for seeing all that all the time.
That scene doesn't bother me all that much because that scene fits the spirit of the movie, which, again, I already mentioned how I don't like the spirit of this movie, but that fits it well enough for me to be like, okay, this works in this movie.
And again, I think the whole scene was pretty much played for laughs.
Yeah.
While still being really gross.
Right. And having a starving Willie and a starving Short Round definitely helps because they're both like, they just want to eat. And when that soup arrives, they both think they're going to finally eat. You see Willie like with her spoon and she's all excited. And next to her, you see Short Round and he's like, ah. And and then they get the eyeballs and yeah, it's poor them. But let's go back and kind of work our way up to this point in the story. They're in the village. They speak to the elder. The elder tells them about how the strangers came and stole their stone. The elder also mentions that they stole their children.
That's right.
And that's when Indy is like, okay, we're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that takes us on a little trip.
Well, no, we're still at the village when the one child shows up.
Pardon me, yes. A child escaped and comes to the village.
Which this is, I think, probably one of the darkest moments in the movie, is seeing this malnourished child struggling to even walk and fall into Indy's arms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously, I think, a big catalyst to push him to go and save all the children from there. But that's definitely probably one of the darkest tones of the movie.
It is. So he decides to go. They hop on some elephants. They go on a little trip. We got Willie being Willie.
This entire adventure towards the palace is just its own short film that could be a silent film. There's, besides maybe the little dialogue between Short Round and Indy arguing over where, playing cards, this whole sequence is just visual stunts and it's visual gags, and it's very funny.
We got while they're playing cards, while Short Round and Indy are playing cards, you got Willie running around in the background. Every 2 seconds, she bumps into some creature that makes her scream, and you got Indiana Jones look at Short Round, and he goes, "You see, the trouble with her is the noise."
It's just nonstop screaming. It's a python, the bat. You get a bunch of weird stuff. There was an owl, and there's something hiding behind a log too. A bunch of weird stuff, but just continuous screaming from Kate Capshaw.
And we get our Indiana Jones and his snake. We get a snake sequence in the film when doesn't Willie throw a snake at him?
Yeah, so essentially Indy is giving a little bit more of exposition at this point, where he's explaining the the history of the palace they're going to and the god that they are talking about. And the entire time, Willie's elephant is playing with her hair, and at one point she gets fed up and thinks it's the elephant, but it's an enormous python right behind her shoulder that's on her shoulder, and she thinks it's the elephant and says, "Would you cut it off?" and throws it away. But Indy's just the only one who can see it, and he's, as we know, not a fan of snakes.
Not a fan of snakes at all. They get to the palace. They sit down to dinner, which we already just discussed. And then that evening, Indy brings a starving Willie a plate of fruit, and we have a scene filled with some sexual tension.
This was another thing that I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention when I was younger and watching this, or if I didn't understand it. It's very provocative dialogue between the two of them.
Yeah, it is.
And I did not expect that. And I think that enough, on top of all the violence, should make this more of a PG-13 rating, if that was around at the time, of course.
Right. Well, since you brought it up, let's take a break from the story again and talk about PG-13 and how it came into existence. So, in the last film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the film received an R rating initially because of Belloc's exploding head. Spielberg did not want it to be rated R, so he put a pillar of fire in front of Belloc's head when it explodes to mask the explosion somewhat, and that brought it back down to PG. So when Temple of Doom came out, the one could say that this film was the straw that broke the camel's back, because there had been a lot of films coming out getting PG ratings when they should have been R. There were a lot of frustrated parents wondering, why did I bring my child to see this movie or that movie when they're showing, all this violence in it? That's because PG-13 did not exist yet. It was G, PG, and then R. So Temple of Doom initially got a PG rating, which it still has today. And Spielberg was like, why? Why is this PG? Like, a man gets his heart ripped out. He gets sacrificed to the god Kali. There's child enslavement. Children get beaten. He personally called up the head of the Motion Picture Association of America and asked if they could create a rating between PG and R called PG-13. And they did. Not in time for the Temple of Doom's release, so it kept its PG rating. But the next film in the series, which is much, much lighter in tone, maybe not much, but much. The Last Crusade is PG-13. So that's why.
I'm sure if they could go back and change all the ratings, all three of them would be PG-13.
Probably. Because I remember as a kid thinking, why the heck is The Last Crusade PG-13 and The Temple of Doom is PG? But then when I learned about the history of the, of PG-13, I was like, okay, that makes sense. And yeah, that's that. Okay, where were we in the story?
There was a sexual dialogue between Willie Scott and Indiana Jones.
Yes.
In which they have a very funny back and forth, to which they have an argument over, as they say it, how easy they are, and then Indy proceeds to storm off into his room, and Willie Scott stays in her room, and they make a comment that you'll be back in 5 minutes, and they both look at their clocks, and they keep going back and forth where Willie looks at her clock and says 5 minutes, and then Indy looks at his clock and says 4.5, and then they're both starting to get ready to presumably make love at some point, and Indy is about to go over, and a wonderful way they shot this. A figure comes out from behind him off of the mural on the wall, of which there are a number of different figures on the wall, and he just blends in perfectly. And it is still, even when you know it's there, it's still just a great way that they shot that.
This is the scene where Harrison Ford got a herniated disc in his back, I believe.
It is.
It is, yes.
He does a certain flip with the other guy on his back, and once he hits the ground, that's when they said he screamed out in pain.
And this affected production just a little bit. Harrison Ford had to be kept on a bed and taken off the bed when his scenes were up, and then put back on the bed when he was done shooting his scenes. It got to the point where he had to leave the set and have, believe it or not, a papaya injection in his lower back to help heal the disc. I encourage everybody to Google this papaya treatment. It's very informative, and you learn something new every day. But anyways,
he did say that during this movie, he was probably in the best shape of his life.
Yes, he was.
We in the documentary, they show some of his workout regimen, of which in today's standards, I can't imagine would be considered the best. But he was in very good shape at this point. He had said that he needed to do that because by the latter half of the film, he was going to have his shirt off most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So he was in very healthy shape, and he said that was a big reason, most likely, why he had such a easy recovery. Maybe not easy recovery, but a quicker recovery than it could have been.
That and the papaya.
And the papaya, of course.
Indy ends up killing the assassin and rushes into Willie's room, presumably to make sure there's no one in there. He ends up finding a secret passageway in her room.
In a very hilarious way.
Yes. And this is where we get to the part with the bugs.
Yeah. I'm usually fine with bugs. On rewatch this last time, got me.
They're nasty.
Really got me.
They are really nasty.
Especially when I found out that they were all real bugs.
They were all real bugs. Yep.
It was pretty nasty, and it was a lot. And I can only imagine how they felt on set.
I believe Kate Capshaw had to take, was it muscle relaxants?
I think it was something like that, where she or was it like an antidepressant that was like a downer that just...
She took some sort of a drug that made her just chill.
Yeah, and that's how she got through her shoot.
Yeah, because the bugs were really getting to her.
That shows how good of an actress she is that it was very viable that she was very scared, even though she was on some kind of relaxer.
Now, it's kind of funny because I already mentioned how this is my least favorite Indiana Jones film, and this has my least favorite shot of any in any Indiana Jones film as well. But this film also has my favorite A, character in Short Round, and B, my favorite scene in any Indiana Jones film. And that is the scene in the spike chamber.
Yeah, that's a great physical prop that they built of both of the ceiling and the floor having spikes pop out.
It's just a great scene. Indy and Short Round walk into this chamber. Short Round steps on some sort of trigger on the ground. The doors close. They're locked in. And Indy's like, oh gosh, Short Round, just stand up against the wall and don't touch anything. And he does, and that's when he triggers the button. I don't know, just some stone slides back, and that's when the spikes come down from the ceiling. And that's when they need to get Willie in there to help them. And some of my favorite Indiana Jones quotes are when he's trying to get Willie to open the
we
door.
Are going to die.
Yes, I love that. Also, when Willie comes into the tunnel, she's like, "There's 2 dead people in here," and Indiana Jones just shouts out, "There's gonna be 2 dead people in here. Move it!"
His line delivery is so good at it because it's just so stark and it's hilarious, and both back and forth is just so good.
When he sticks his fist out the hole in the wall and goes, "Do it now!" I love it. I love it so much.
It is a great sequence, and it's Spielberg's favorite sequence in the entire movie as well.
Yeah.
He said that it's, what did he say? It's a callback to the old serials where there was always some kind of trap like this, and he always wanted to do it, and he said he was so giddy when they were making the actual set. He said that everything was perfect in it, and he thinks it's his favorite scene in the movie.
And the whole thing just ends in a great way because Willie saves them. But then when she walks into the room, she triggers the whole thing again, and Indy just rolls his eyes, and they have to get out. They make their way out of the room just in time. Indy manages to grab his hat at the last second in a famous shot, and now we get to the. I don't like this next sequence.
I think when I was younger, this sequence was always just so exciting to me because it's it's such an impressive scene of visual, the lights are incredible. Everything's incredible that I think when I was younger, I was just mesmerized by it. Again, on this most recent rewatch, this is one disturbing scene.
It's very disturbing. Yes.
If you really sit down and think about the context of a man's heart getting pulled out of his chest and then his still living body being lowered into a pit of fire just for his heart to catch flame because he's catching on fire is just wildly disturbing. That's a rated R scene right there.
Yes. And I think that's why Spielberg argued for a higher rating in the first place. Was if I had to take a guess, it would be that scene. And we meet the big baddie of this movie, Mola Ram. He's the head of the cult of Kali. He performs the sacrifice himself. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. And it's my least favorite scene in the movie.
Well, he nails it. As much as this scene was disturbing, I still think it's probably the most impactful in the whole movie.
I can't argue with that.
I think it's definitely still, definitely the most resonant, and I think people like to quote it, even though it is the most intense of the film.